In the previous videos, we discussed the global economic crisis brought by neoliberalism, the resurrection of economic nationalism, and progressive internationalism as an ideological alternative. Winning the demands of progressive internationalism will require deeply disciplined and strategic action on a global scale. But for decades, many progressives have acted locally in isolation, embraced counterproductive ideas, and acted without the ambition needed to win power. To win a progressive platform globally, we must break the bad habits that are hindering progressive victories. In this video, we'll propose 3 strategic tenets that progressives should adopt in order to win. 1. We can no longer focus exclusively on local and national politics. Instead, we must build a global coalition to coordinate political action worldwide. 2. We must judge every part of society by its potential to advance our strategic agenda, not by how much it is implicated in ongoing oppression. In other words, rather than condemning corporations, banks, and trade deals, we should compel them to act for the common good. And 3, we have to push beyond mere regulation to ambitiously win democratic control over investment. Let's take a closer look at why these 3 strategic tenets are essential. First, we must build global solidarity. The law of capitalism is to maximize profits. This obliges banks, investors, and corporations to funnel capital wherever the greatest profit can be made. Without global regulation, we see global tax evasion and the global race to the bottom of labor rights and environmental deregulation. Corporations flee places with worker and environmental protections to places without them. Globally, progressives are only as strong as our weakest link. Systematically disempowered during neoliberalism, progressives defensively focused on attainable local victories, a habit we're still stuck in. While power building must begin locally, enduring victories will require progressives working together globally under a shared strategic umbrella. The good news is that global supply chains may be disrupted through global coordination. While workers in rich and poor countries may have different problems and goals, they often share a common boss, and they almost always share a common international legal framework that enables their exploitation. United across borders, workers can hold more power and demand better standards throughout the supply chain. Once that happens, capitalists can't get the competitive edge by degrading working conditions. Instead, businesses will have to compete with each other through socially useful innovation and investing in workers to enable them to produce better goods and services. Tenet 2. Existing institutions must be repurposed, not destroyed. The track record of big banks, corporations, and trade deals is so exploitative that many naturally view them as a threat. After years of rightly critiquing these institutions' abuses, many progressives have begun demanding they be dismantled, but this would merely create a dispersed network of smaller operations that are harder to regulate. To win a progressive economy, we must assess each element within society not for its current role in ongoing oppression, but for its potential to do good. That means we must not destroy, but rather repurpose corporations and trade deals toward progressive ends. When a city wins a wage increase, it's good, but forcing international corporations to raise wages can have a far greater impact. The global nature of today's supply chains make it possible to disrupt the profits of multinational corporations through global coordination. But rather than collaborating globally to push companies to operate responsibly, today's economic nationalists on the right and left instead offer knee-jerk ideas like withdrawing from trade agreements like NAFTA or trade organizations like the WTO. The problem with that is today's integrated global economy consists of countries who have become dependent on each other's markets to ensure continued growth. Protectionism would unwind decades of integration and result in trade wars, economic stagnation, international recession, and potentially even devastating famine. Keeping banks and corporations big also keeps them dependent on multinational trade deals to sustain profits. That means trade deals could become an instrument leveraged for enormous progressive gain. Through global coordination, we can demand trade deals include international wage floors and environmental safeguards, the benefits of which can impact billions more people than any national reform. And yet, to truly fight inequality, we must set our ambitions beyond just redistribution and regulation. Those are essential changes, but aren't enough to fix the underlying global economic crisis. Regulated or not, markets fail to invest in critical social goods like health and education and in capital-starved areas from North India to the south side of Chicago. Investing in capital deserts would not only improve lives, it would revive the economy. New jobs create new consumers who can buy things without credit card debt, leading to new investment in their families and communities. But underdeveloped areas require large-scale, long-term investment to develop their potential. Private investors prefer quick returns and shun poor areas. As growth has become more and more narrow, investors have increasingly turned to socially useless speculative investment. Today, investors throw their money at millions of low-cost tech startups or abstract financial products, hoping one sticks. These generally sell luxury services to people with money, like, for instance, an app to order drone-delivered groceries. Such ideas cost little because they create few jobs, and investors hope to get rich quick, selling the idea when it's novel and people are willing to gamble on its speculative future value. On its own, capital will innovate to sell to existing wealth. But as a society, we can choose to guide investment to innovate around creating new wealth. This leads us to the third strategic tenet. We must be bold enough to aim beyond regulation to democratically control investment. In a progressive economy with democratic control of investment, elected officials will guide capital toward market-neglected regions that present the most potential to lift people out of poverty and expand the global middle class. Elected representatives determine where markets fail to solve essential economic and social problems and create powerful incentives to attract investment there. At that point, bankers won't want to fund those grocery drones because investments like those don't create jobs or long-term value for most of society. Unspent fortunes lying dormant in billionaire accounts would be heavily taxed, as would profits from unproductive gambling on things like the value of foreign currency, or profits for selling tech startups for billions before they make a dime. So, just as one example, instead of flying groceries to elites who already live next door to a healthy grocery store, investors might be incentivized to, say, invest in creating healthy food services in food deserts, places where a good grocery store can't be found for miles because no one can afford it. The state will subsidize consumers there who can't afford those goods today, while the investment will eventually create the jobs that help them afford it without subsidy. In this way, each country's government will be empowered to sculpt the market to meet their social needs, and those social needs that the market is not suited to address, such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure, the state will directly administer. Whereas neoliberals want to shrink the state and social investments, a progressive economy would direct dormant capital in billionaires' bank accounts to global and regional development banks that will fund democratic priorities like massive health and education initiatives and new infrastructure, extending these fundamental human rights to capital-starved areas in both poor and rich countries, while creating millions of new jobs at the same time. And whereas right-wing nationalists prioritize destructive sectors for investment, such as coal and oil, a progressive economy will finance massive green infrastructure and renewable energy projects to fuel job growth. But such an economy can only be achieved when we beat neoliberal ideology and win democratic control over investment, which raises the question, how do we do that? In the next video, we'll discuss the coalition fighting to make progressive internationalism a reality.